Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. We like to think of ourselves as good people. When we see or hear about injustices, most of us think we would do the right thing, whether it would be defying authority in order to help people or by demonstrating courage under challenging circumstances. And yet, studies and history reveal that we often do nothing, conform with brutality, or comply with authority. It appears that the line between doing good versus doing evil may be thinner than any of us would prefer to imagine. My guest, Dr. Philip Zimbardo, has taught psychology at Stanford University for over 50 years and was the author and lead researcher of the internationally famous Stanford Prison Experiment. The results of the study, which is now a landmark in social psychology, suggest that otherwise psychologically healthy people can behave badly under the right circumstances. Dr. Zimbardo has done deep research into the evil humans can perform, and more recently, he has done a 180 and become an important voice in studying evil's opposite, heroism. His Heroic Imagination Project uses scientific research to teach us to harness our abilities to act heroically and override any innate biases that might cause us to conform or be bystanders rather than upstanders. The program has garnered tremendous praise and has been implemented into training programs at police departments, public schools, and other organizations. So listen in as Dr. Zimbardo and I discuss the good and evil that humans are capable of doing and how to call upon our better selves under stress. Dr. Philip Zimbardo, who has asked me to call him Dr. Z, welcome to Super Psyched.
Greetings. My son's name is Adam also.
I love that. Nice to know that we share a connection there as well as from some Bronx past. And speaking of the Bronx past, there isn't a lot out there about your past. And I've heard from a very reliable source that you had a tough childhood, even growing up on the TB ward at some points. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your roots.
So I grew up in poverty in the South Bronx. We lived all over. In fact, we were so poor that we would have to move every 3 months because in those days, you just paid 1 month's rent in advance. And so we would pay 1 month's rent in advance. Then when my father lost his job, we couldn't pay the rent. We would call them midnight adventures. We would move out at midnight. We had very little furniture and we would move a few blocks away. In fact, I have a list of from the time I was born in March 1933 until the time I left to come to Stanford University, I had lived in 19 different places. So it's
such a short period of time.
In the first few years, it was several places every year. I mean, we live in one place 3 weeks, then live in another place 3 months. So it was not a stable childhood. And then the other problem was in those days, those areas where poor people lived, they were very toxic environments. They still had street vendors who came around really with donkeys or horses. So it'd be manure on the streets that would be left there because they would only clean the streets once every 3 or 4 days. And so many kids got sick. And when I was 5, I had double pneumonia, and whooping cough was a contagious disease then. It was like 1938, 39. There was a big polio epidemic. So thousands of kids all over, but mostly in New York, had polio. So I was sent to a hospital on the East River of New York called Willard Parker Hospital for Children with Contagious Diseases. And in this hospital, if I close my eyes, I see endless beds, and was for kids who were from 2 years old to 16. If you're over 16, you were not a kid. And if you're younger than 2, you had to be cared for at home. But it was kids with polio, with scarlet fever, with pneumonia, everything you could name. And of course, it's 1938. And what did we not have in 1938? Any kind of medicine, no sulfa drugs, no penicillin. What that means is no treatment. What that means is kids died every day, every night.
And that happened all around you.
All over. Yeah. I mean, you'd wake up and you'd ask the nurse, Nurse Nancy, where is Billy? She said, oh, he went home. Why didn't he say goodbye? Well, it was in the middle of the night, told me to give you regards. And suddenly there was this conspiracy of denial between children, patients, and nurses, where we all knew going home meant to die. But the problem was with the semantics, that's what you wanted to do more than anything else.
Oh my gosh.
Go home that way, not that way.
Right. So you wanted to actually stay in the hospital because going home meant you were moribund. You were going to die.
Yeah, you die. And so I survived. When I got out, one of my not favorite aunts said, little Philip, you're all, what did she call it? Skin and bones, which was true. But, you didn't have to tell me that.
Right.
I could look in the mirror.
So your childhood was tumultuous. And I mean, you were moved a great many times and you had to consider death at a very young age. And then you went on to high school. And a lot of people don't know this, but you went to the same high school as the great Stanley Milgram, another incredible, prominent social psychologist who's famous for the obedience study that really helped explain how the Holocaust occurred. I mean, the chances of the two of you graduating from the same class in the same high school is infinitesimally small. Right. And here, how do you explain that?
It was obviously by chance. When you graduate from junior high school, if you were any good, the only two high schools that you wanted to go to in New York was Bronx High School of Science, if you lived in the Bronx, which I did, or Stuyvesant High School, which was at the end of Manhattan. And so I wanted to go to Bronx High School of Science. And that year they were over enrolled. So the kids who got into Bronx High School of Science got shifted to Stuyvesant High. And the problem with Stuyvesant, it was all boys in those days. And the last thing I wanted to do is be around all boys. In junior high school, the school was divided into boys and girls. And Bronx High School of Science had boys and girls. So I went to Stuyvesant 1 year, but it also meant traveling on a subway from the Bronx all the way down to the end of Manhattan and then coming back. And so I finished 1 year with distinction. Then I said, no, I want to be closer to home. And James Monroe High School was a little bit in the North Bronx. And to get into any high school, you had to live in the confines in that vicinity. So we got somebody to say I live with them. So I went to Monroe, which I shouldn't have done. And it turns out Stanley Milgram, he was a small, skinny Jewish kid. And I was a tall, skinny Sicilian kid. And we were in the same class in junior year and senior year. Now, what was interesting about him was he was so serious. I mean, you're in high school, and there was girls everywhere, so I was delighted. Stanley was concerned about the Holocaust. It's now 1948, let's say, 48, 49, 50. It's not that far from the end of the war.
Right.
And in class, maybe we had a civics class. And then he would say to the teacher of the class, do you think the Holocaust could happen again in America? Could me and my family be sent to concentration camps? Here we are, kids. We want just a date with the prettiest girl in class. And he's talking about being put in a concentration camp. And we say, Stanley, it could never happen here. We're not that kind of person. And he said, how do you know what you would do until you put in that same situation? So in high school, he was a situationist and a serious kid. So he graduated at the top of the class. And I was voted most popular boy in the class. I was a quote, Jimmy Monroe. So we separated. We went to different colleges. He did his study at Yale.
Right.
Now, I did my graduate work at Yale University in psychology. Right. And then I left Yale. And my first job was at NYU in the Bronx. And then Stanley almost took my position at Yale. I mean, after I graduated, I taught at Yale for a year, actually to stay out of the Korean War. Mm-hmm. When I left Yale, he came to Yale, and that's where he did his obedience studies. So at that point, I think we met at conventions. And then some years later, when I did my Stanford Prison Experiment, he came up afterwards. He had been in the audience in the back. He gave me a big hug, and I was surprised. Stanley, He said, I am so happy that now yours is the most unethical study than mine. I am off the ethics hook.
Yeah. So let's go there for a second. You are world famous for the Stanford Prison Experiment. First of all, what caused you to engage in that study? What did you really want to know?
You see, the Milgram study, as important as it is, it's only about adults. His participants were males living in New Haven, Connecticut, which Yale is, ages 20 to 50, who got to the study only to get some money. And essentially, they are put in a position where an authority, somebody in a white lab coat, who actually was a high school biology teacher, he said, you have been chosen to be the teacher, and the other person in this room has by chance been chosen to be your student. And now you have to try to educate him, give him lessons to solve. When he gets it right, you say, fine, good. And then you give him the next problem. But when he gets it wrong, you have to punish him by shocking. And so the excuse was, we know that reward improves learning. Nobody has studied whether punishment also improves learning. So on the surface, it looked like we were doing a good thing, trying to improve the quality of education. But in fact, the authority figure and the student were confederates of Milgram's. And so they set it up so that at some point, they would always make mistake after mistake. And the way you punish the mistake is you pressed a button on a big shock box sitting in front of you that had 30 switches starting from 15 volts and increasing in 15 volt increments, 15, 30, 45, et cetera. And once you got over 100, the person, your student who's in another room, so you don't see them,
right?
So it's all pre-recorded tape, begins to yell and scream. And then every time you press the button, they scream louder and louder. And then finally, it gets up to 300 volts. And the guy's screaming and saying, please, I don't want to go on. I quit the experiment. And what you hear is the teacher/participant telling the authority figure, I don't want to go on. I don't want to hurt anybody.
Right.
And the authority says, you must go on. Right. It's your job. And so the question that Milgram raised is, these are adults, they're not the kids, who would blindly obey this authority, knowing that what they were doing was causing pain. In fact, at highest levels of 450 volts, could be lethal.
Right.
And the amazing thing was that 2 of every 3 participants, and he ran hundreds and hundreds, went all the way to 450 volts.
Yeah.
So that was a dramatic study, but it was a study about individuals. Would this person do that?
And I just have to interject this one point that you made in the book. And that's so fascinating that psychiatrists estimated that 1% of the population, perhaps the psychopaths, would engage in such behavior, not 2/3 of the population. So I love that
really
you
highlight. So again, Milgram set that as the baseline, asking 40 psychiatrists at the Yale Medical School, describing it. You say, what percent of all Americans would go all the way? They said 1%, because to do so, you'd have to be a psychopath. But what Milgram showed is you don't have to be a psychopath. You only have to follow orders. And that was the point. The subtext of Milgram's study was that's what the Nazis did. They were following orders of the Fuhrer, of all the people in the chain of command. So that my link to that is to flip the other side to say, in certain situations, anybody or the majority of good people will do bad things.
Yeah.
Not because somebody is ordering you, because you're playing a role in a particular setting. So essentially, it's many of us have jobs where in that job, there's a role we play, and the role is prescribed by that situation. So it doesn't matter if you're a good person or a bad person, you need to make a living. So I was looking at situations where people are playing roles. There's a justification for why they have to do things that could harm other people. And then I thought about prisons. In a prison, there's only 2 roles. You're a prisoner, and there's a role of your guard. Your job as a guard is to prevent prisoners from escaping, to keep them in line so they won't abuse one another, or certainly not to attack you and the fellow guards. Because in every prison, there's a few guards and there's hundreds of prisoners.
Right.
So in most places, prison guards always are feared for their life.
Sure.
So what I wanted to do 2 things. I wanted to do an experiment that didn't last only 1 hour. I wanted people to get involved, engaged in the role they were assigned.
Mm-hmm. And see how it progressed.
Yeah. So we said, okay, in order to get into the role, we'll need time. So the study is going to go for up to 2 weeks. Okay. And that's what we advertised in the Palo Alto newspaper, which Palo Alto is where Stanford University is, where I had just begun being a professor. And we said, wanted college students. So we wanted bright college students from all over America who happened to be finishing summer school at University of California, Berkeley, or at Stanford. And I knew they all had 2 weeks free because the fall semester didn't start till after Labor Day in those times. So we knew we have lots of participants, we used to call them subjects then, available for 2 weeks, and they all could use a little bit of money. So they're getting $15 a day for up to 2 weeks to play the role of prison guard. 75 people answered the ad in the newspaper. We gave them personality tests, clinical interviews, physical health, and then we picked 24, most normal, most healthy. And then we randomly assigned half to be guards, half to be prisoners. The prisoners lived in cells 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the guards worked 8-hour shifts. So at the beginning of the prison was in the basement of the psychology department. Obviously not a real prison. We just took office doors off. We built doors that had bars on them. And there were 3 prison cells, and there were 3 prisoners assigned to each cell. And there were 3 guards on each of 8-hour shifts. And then what made the study work immediately is I had the real Palo Alto policemen arrest all of the boys who were going to play the role of prisoners at their home and the dormitories and bring them down to the police department and do a formal booking. Again, we're playing with images.
Absolutely.
So they knew at some level, they knew this was that experiment that they signed up for. But on the other hand, these were real policemen. They're in a squad car with sirens wailing. They get fingerprinted, they get photographed, they get booked, and then put in a real prison cell until my assistants, Craig Haney, Kurt Banks, picked them up, brought them to our prison with a blindfold on. And then next thing they know, they were stripped naked and they're standing in front of a mirror and it's welcome to the Stanford Prison Experiment.
So you really added a level of realism to the whole experiment. And this was very intentional so that it wasn't just theoretical. It was intended to...
very realistic. No, it was, we wanted them to think they were imprisoned in, it was really the Stanford jail. We had signs, Stanford jail, because you're in jail until your case is litigated. So it's as if they were arrested on a charge, and usually it was armed robbery or something of this kind. And then that the policeman told them, and they're really waiting to go to trial. That's what the setting is. What happened initially was nothing. On day 1, nothing happened because nobody wanted to be a prison guard. Why? It's 1971. The Vietnam War has been going on. Students everywhere, including me as a professor, are encouraging students to protest. The protests often got destructive and violent. University authorities often called the local police on to quell the riots. And there were really abuses of police against students who were helpless. And so police were, in those days, pigs. So nobody wanted to play the role of prison guard because that's like being a policeman, that's like being a pig. But they were randomly assigned. At the beginning, the guards were just sitting outside prison cells, getting them out, having to do push-ups, jumping jacks, and then putting them back in the cell. In fact, there was no definition of what they should do. So at the end of the first day, I said, I'm going to terminate this tomorrow. I mean, nothing's happening. But on the morning of the second day, the prisoners revolted. They revolted because they didn't want to be, in quote, dehumanized, because we took away their names. They had numbers. So the only thing the guards did on day 1 is say, you are your number. You have to remember your number. You have to say your number. Whenever I ask you a question, you always have to answer with your number first and then give the answer. And they didn't like that. So what they did is they barricaded themselves in 2 of the 3 cells. And then they started yelling at the guards, and big mistake, telling the guards they're going to, when they get out, when the prisoners get out, they're going to kick their ass. And suddenly the guards come to me and say, what are we going to do? I said, your prison, what do you want to do? They said, we need reinforcements. So they called in all the guards on the other shifts. Plus we had 3 additional guards, backup guards. And they came in and so they tore down the door. They stripped the prisoners naked. In some cases, they tied them up with rope and put them in solitary confinement. And suddenly that changed everything. We could have audio or video, and you hear one of the guards say, these are dangerous prisoners. At that moment, it's not an experiment anymore. It's a prison to be dominated by prison guards who must suppress prisoners who are dangerous. And then suddenly it took off. And then the guards were more and more brutal, more and more creatively evil, meaning they have 8 hours to kill. And you're not going to do the same thing over and over, push-ups, jumping jack. So then they would have prisoners do push-ups and have other prisoners step on their back when they were doing it. They have prisoners that say, you're camels, you're female camels bend over, male camels get behind and hump them. This is college students in the role of guards getting other college students to simulate sodomy.
And one of the things that you also mentioned, by the way, just to kind of talk about the context, is that boredom seems to be fertile soil for horrible deeds. And that seems like boredom amongst, kind of killing time for the prison guards led them to these creative ways to be cruel.
Now, again, these are young men chosen because they were normal, healthy. Nobody wanted to be a guard. So it's not like you say, well, they want to get off on knowing that guards can do cruel things. Say, no, nobody wanted to do that. And it's almost as if the prisoners' rebellion pushed them over to say, okay, we have to do something. And then now you got 8 hours to kill. You can't do the same thing every night. It's got to be more creative for you to make it more enjoyable. And again, they didn't know that what they were doing was under observation. We didn't have a one-way screen. We had a little hole in the wall with a camera, and we had scrim over it. So the guards never knew whether anybody was looking or not looking, recording or not recording. We had tape recorders in the cells so we could monitor what the prisoners were saying. And we made about 30 hours of audio recordings and about 15 hours of video recordings, which is the record of the Stanford Prison Experiment. And I should say, all of that material is available at the Stanford Historical Archives for anybody who's interested, if you want to know exactly what happened, because there's been a lot of criticism, debate about what really happened. If you want to know what really happened, look at the videos. That's it. Or listen to the audio.
Yeah. Speaking of that, what is something that you wish the public knew about this that they might have been perhaps even misinformed about with regard to the design or the experiment itself?
Well, number one, the guards were given no instruction about how to be a guard. The prisoners were given no instruction on how to be a prisoner. They simply said, your role is guard, your role is prisoner, and the experiment begins now. And so I try to make it as realistic a simulation that it could be. The guards had to come in each day, park their car, get on a bus, and walk down, and they see it says psychology department. They walk down a basement. So they knew it's not a jail. So that's the most interesting thing, is that the prisoners are living there 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and daytime, 12 hours a day at night. But the guards come and go. I mean, whatever they do downstairs, they go home, they lead a normal life for the rest of the 16 hours. And so that's the interesting thing. They come down, they go in the guards' quarters, they take off their civvies, they put on the prison uniform, they chat with the guards getting off duty on the previous shift, and they share some things that, this prisoner is being a troublemaker. This prisoner looks like he's suffering. I'm a little worried about whether he's going to make it, et cetera. And then they get on what we call the yard, which is the hallway, and they become prison guards. It's putting on the uniform, literally, figurative, is getting into the role of prison guard. And then it's what in your mind is a prison guard. From all the movies you've seen, from all the books you have read, prison guards have to be tough and make the prisoners obey them. So that's the part that's similar to Milgram's study, is that at some point, the guards want the prisoners to be blindly obedient. When I say go, you go. When I say jump, you jump. So partly it's demonstrating to yourself, as well as the prisoners, your power over them to dominate.
There was an old Bugs Bunny cartoon where you see Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny each wearing different hats at different times. And each time a new hat hits their head, their personalities change dramatically. Right. And it sounds like that was consistent with your finding as well, depending on what people were wearing.
It had only to do with the uniform. The study was supposed to go for 2 weeks, but it was physically exhausting and psychologically exhausting. Why? Because the staff of the study was me, 2 graduate students, and 1 undergraduate. It's 4 people working 24-hour shifts. At any one time, somebody had to be asleep. And I actually slept on a couch in my office in the building. So I never left the building.
Wow.
Somebody had to be going out getting food at the cafeteria, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Somebody had to be, in quote, manning the video equipment. When prisoners started having breakdowns, somebody, meaning me, had to bring them to student health. So it was exhausting, physically and psychologically exhausting. And in 36 hours, the first prisoner, 8612 Doug Corpy, had an emotional breakdown and had to be released. And so he became an example of how to get out, crying, yelling, screaming. And then we couldn't tell whether it was real or play acting. But then each day, another prisoner had a breakdown, more and more extreme. And I think at that point, I probably would have had the experiment go till Sunday. from Sunday to Sunday, 1 week, because I knew we could go a second week. I mean, it was just physically exhausting, psychologically exhausting. And what happened on Thursday night, my girlfriend, Christina Maslach, who had graduated from Stanford, had just gotten a job at Berkeley, and we were thinking of moving in together, starting a relationship. And she came down, she was at the library at Stanford, comes down and she's looking at the video and she's seeing the guards abusing the prisoners, hitting them, banging them, having them bang each other. The guards put bags over their heads because they didn't want them to see where they were going. And I'm saying, hey, Chris, look at this. Look at the power of the situation unveiling. Nobody's ever seen this. And she starts tearing up, says, I can't look at it. It's horrible, and runs out. We have this big argument in front of the psychology department outside. And then finally she says, these are not prisoners. These are not guards. They're students. And you love students. Your reputation is you're known for loving students more than anybody else. And these are students, and you are having them suffer. And it's your fault. It's your experiment. And I keep arguing. And then she said, wait a minute, you have changed. I didn't know who I'm talking to. I don't think I want to continue my romantic relationship with you. And that was the wake-up call. She was saying, the experiment has changed you more than anybody else. You have become a different person. And I don't even know who you are. I'm looking at you.
Wow.
And at that moment, I said, oh my God, you're right. Bang, slap in the face, wake up. And so we had dinner, and I said, I'm going to end the study tomorrow. So the next day, I actually had a public defender coming down who was a cousin of one of the prisoners. And I said, I'll wait till he goes through his routine, and then I'll end the study, which is what I did.
And was Christina correct? First of all, it sounds like she was an upstander. And second of all, it sounds like she saw something in you. Was that accurate? Had you changed?
Well, I changed because I made the mistake of playing the role of superintendent of the Stanford jail. Yeah. And in that role, who do you care about? The guards, not the prisoners. Prisoners come and go. Guards are your staff. Same way if you're the principal of a high school, you care about teachers, not students. And so I had changed, but you're not aware because it changes day by day. So the point is, I could see guards abusing prisoners and not feel the suffering of the prisoners. And all I said from the beginning is no physical punishment. The guards did psychological punishment, which was worse.
And, the interesting thing for me, Dr. Z, is I've read the study and all types of analysis around it so many times. And to hear it from you is so much more profound.
Oh, good.
It's just wonderful. What were the conclusions that you drew from that study, just for the listeners?
It's easy for good people to be seduced into evil by starting off playing a role, by being in a social situation which gives validity to whatever role you're playing. And there is an implied contract that this is what you're supposed to do in this setting. And when you go home, you could be something else. But when you're in this physical, social setting, you play a role that is relevant and appropriate for this situation. And so the implications have power way beyond Nazi concentration camps. Milgram was interested way beyond real prisons. So I wrote a book called The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil. And in that, I went into great detail about the prison study, about Abu Ghraib, where I was an expert witness for one of the guards, about the rape of Nanking, where a Japanese did horrendous things to Chinese civilians, literally rape, torture, and murder of civilians. So that was 15 chapters of the ugliness of human nature. And then in the 16th chapter, I said, enough about evil. I think I have proven how easy it is for good people like any of us to go down the slippery slope of evil. And I described the 7 steps down. What about we reverse it? Is it possible for ordinary people like any of you readers to become heroes? Well, I think so. But it turns out at that time, there was not a single bit of research on heroism in psychology. The term hero and heroism was not in the lexicon of psychology. And the book was 1977. And so I said, okay, here's something I ought to do. I ought to begin to study heroes. And that's what I've been doing for the rest of my life.
I'm so glad you did. And your ability to describe the barrier between good and evil as being so thin, and that we self-deceive. It's just an unconscious bias. It seems that all humans have, that we're good, that we would never do what was done in X, Y, or Z context because we're good people.
Right.
But your research, as well as Milgram's, as well as Ash's study on conformity, really demonstrates that We would in large numbers. And I love the idea of you trying to create criteria for heroism and to increase the taxonomy in psychology to allow for heroism to emerge. I'm thinking about in positive psychology, one of Seligman's big, undertakings was to try to define happiness, something that no one was willing to qualify or quantify. Here you are trying to explain what a hero is. Can you describe the characteristics of a hero?
Well, Marty Seligman, again, in a funny way, he's a personologist. He's saying, it's important for people to be happy, but he's focused more on the internal qualities. What can a person do to be happy? Well, you could be happy giving torture. I mean, our guards were happy torturing prisoners in new ways. They were happy because they said, wow, nobody's ever done this before. So I can't physically torture, but look at the things that I can create. So I've been always at odds with Marty about why he never joined in the situationist thing to say, how about creating situations that encourage happiness, that encourage more than happiness, empathy. So how about creating settings? How can schools, how can classrooms promote empathy? Well, you start by diminishing bullying. So you have to do an analysis of situation. What is common in many schoolrooms around the world? There were some kids who bully other kids, bigger kids bullying smaller kids, kids who are more fragile, who have some handicap, get bullied. Well, that's a place to begin by saying, how are we going to transform the inner ugliness of the bully into bullies who are empathic to say, okay, that's wrong to do that. I will be helping kids who are handicapped rather than harming kids who are handicapped. And so my hero program, we became a California nonprofit foundation whose mission is to train youth how to be everyday heroes, how to be heroes in waiting for an opportunity, waiting for a situation where they can enact being an upstander rather than a passive bystander. And to help them on that path, I've created a series of lessons, which, as I would in my class at Stanford, which includes videos and critical thinking skills, Q&A training, personal involvement of the student, the program, and even now with the teacher. We would license our lessons for a small fee, like $1,500 for 3 years, because we revise them every 3 years. And that is the only income of the Heroic Imagination Project. And again, I call it that because heroism starts in the imagination. I could be one. Now, as kids, we all had heroes, but they were comic book heroes.
Yep.
Actually, when I was in that hospital back in 38, 39,
sure,
Marvel comic books had just come out. We all wanted to be Superman. And now kids wanted to be Spider-Man, or now girls want to be Wonder Woman. But when I give talks to schools, now I do it virtually, I say, you know what? Every superhero envies you because you have one thing that they don't have. I said, what could that be? I said, you can't fly, you can't swim underwater for a long time, bullets don't bounce off you, but you have a brain. Superheroes are the brainchild of a cartoonist. and each superhero can only do one thing, one amazing thing, but only one thing.
Right.
And with your brain, you could do anything. And the problem is using it wisely, using it well, so that you become an everyday hero who does things. Bullets don't have to bounce off you. What you have to do is help somebody who's fallen down and is hurt. Stop kids in your class from bullying some other kid. So we say, here's what you could do. And then here's our lesson, which helps you how you should do it.
It's interesting. As you describe this, I'm thinking about the verbal skills and the dance moves required to be a hero and how they might be counterintuitive to how we're wired, almost like the idea of turning into a skid. When we're skidding our car, our reflexes say turn away from the skid. And yet we need to practice turning into the skid. And I'm wondering, what kind of drills do you give a child to practice and rehearse so that when they are actually in real life, in a situation, to exercise their newfound hero skills? What are some drills that you can give them so that they are prepared to act heroically?
So what we do in our lessons is we show them videos. You're walking down the street, you see somebody walking down the street, and you see somebody trip and fall off the curb. He's bleeding. He knocked his head down. And before you get there, there's a number of other people standing, looking at that person, and they're all looking at each other and nobody's helping. And you can't tell how serious it is. You see blood coming from his head. He's unconscious. So what do you do so that we present that it stops? What are the alternatives? So we give you an analysis of situation. Do what everybody else is, do nothing, pass him by, go to see if he needs help, ask, do you need help to the person? That's an action that nobody else is taking. If he's unconscious, then what can you do? You can call 911. You can call the fire department. You can call the police. You certainly can pick the person up off of the street and put them on the sidewalk so they don't get run over by.
Right.
So the bottom line is you must do something. Heroes act. Heroes don't just think. Heroes analyze the situation. So we essentially say heroes are social psychologists in the making. They analyze the situation. They say, what can I do given my skills and talent? If I'm a young kid, I might not be able to lift up this guy. But what can I do? I can say, I need help. And once you do that, you engage these passive bystanders. They pick up the person, put them on the sidewalk. And if you don't have a cell phone, you say, could somebody call the police? Could somebody call 911? But the key is heroes act.
You know, one of my favorite definitions that you came up with for evil is knowing better, but doing worse. And I thought that was just so succinct and perfect. And it really sums up what we are wired to do. You cited, I believe it was like a bar exam with 600 people taking the exam and one of the people having convulsions, and only 2 out of the 600 people was willing to do anything. And of course, they faced negative repercussions for helping. And one of the things that you also note is that sometimes behaving heroically means that you are actually going to be punished at the end and still going through with it.
Oh, for sure. That's a great example. I always forgot that. In fact, the time that those 2 students came to the aid of the other one, originally deducted from the time,
right.
the time exam. I mean, later the authorities made it up, gave them the additional time. Yeah, I mean, there is a cost to being a hero. Heroes can also die. So Carnegie here, the Carnegie Foundation, every year has Carnegie Heroes. But it all started with soldiers in battle who took a bullet for their buddy. Most Carnegie heroes are dead heroes. We say, no, we want you to be a live hero. We want you to live forever and spread your goodness. But we want you to be a wise and effective hero, meaning you're going to do a heroic deed that helps somebody else, and we want you to survive. So in fire department training, a building goes on fire. And what is the point at which firemen are not permitted to enter that building? I don't know, it's like a level 5 or something. It means that the roof is likely to fall in and you will die. So that even though people are on the top floor yelling, help me, there's a point at which you say, A, I cannot help them. And in addition, in trying to help them, I could die. And so that we don't want you to be a dead hero. We want you to be a wise lifetime hero to come to the situation again. So we give those kinds of examples. So it's always be a social psychologist. Stand back, stop for a moment, analyze the situation, what needs to be done, what could be done, what do I have the qualifications and ability to do where I can't do it myself. I have to always bring in other people to help me. And amazingly, for sometimes it's very difficult for us to say to other people, I need help, because sometimes you need help. Let's say eating and something gets caught in your throat and you can't breathe. So you have to indicate to people that they have to hit you on the back that you could die. And in many cases, we see people are even reluctant to impose on other people person or time, even when not doing so means you could die.
Right. And one of the other distinctions that you make, and I think it's so important, especially around leadership and around the concept of heroism, is that heroes behave in a manner that is sociocentric, not egocentric.
Yeah, our problem is, we are egocentric. We survive by saying, what do I have to do to survive? You know, again, and go back to Milgram and concentration camps. How did some of the concentration camp victims survive? And how did others in the same setting give up and die? So again, it's analyzing the situation to say, what are the degrees of freedom that I have? What can I do to make one of the Nazi guards not hate me? Maybe I could tell a joke. Maybe I can make fun that while I'm mopping up the floor, I could dance with the broom, like you see in some movie, Fred Astaire movie. And I know people who survived concentration camps who actually did some of those things. And it's never quite clear why those people are more creative in situations where there's limited opportunity to be creative, but they find one thing in that situation. I want to mention to your listeners an incredible woman named Edie Eger, E-G-E-R, who was in Auschwitz at the age of 16, along with her older sister, who was very frail and sickly. Her mother and father were killed when they got off the railroad carts. They line up in front of Dr. Mengele, and he puts his thumb to the right or to the left. And if it's to the right, you go into this building, and if it's to the left, you go into that building. And to the right means you go immediately into the crematorium. Old people and children who were not useful workers would be killed immediately. The others would go into a slave labor unit. And so Edie took her sister and went into the other room. They stripped them naked. They shaved their head immediately. They give their prison number on their arm. And then suddenly it's horrible. There's not enough food. People are dying. And what does Edie do? At some point, she tells the women, all the women live together, these women prisoners who are in rags. He says, okay, today we're going to have a big boobs contest. We're going to see who has the best boobs, knowing that her sister had a very big, attractive breasts. And so in the middle of this nightmare of the Holocaust in Auschwitz, she has these women all showing their breasts to each other. And so it's a strange kind of comedy, but it broke the moment for many of these women. And then also, she was a ballet dancer. And on Sunday nights, Dr. Mengele would have Jewish musicians perform for him and his guests. And she would dance ballet. And she did this in order to get 2 pieces of bread, one for her, one for her sister. And she's wrote an incredible book called The Gift that I wrote the forward to. And she's a dear friend of mine. She lives in San Diego. She's now a clinical psychologist whose main work is to help survivors, women who survived abusive husbands, et cetera, et cetera. Dr. Edie, E-D-I-E-G-E-R, and the book is a masterpiece. It's not till chapter 4 that you realize it has anything to do about Auschwitz. And she gives speeches all over the world, well, when you could travel.
She sounds absolutely incredible, and I would love to interview her at some point. But Dr. Z, back to the traits of a hero. What other traits might parents who are listening or people who want to foster their own internal hero, how could we work that out? What are some of the metrics that we could increase in our own lives?
I think it's practicing a focus on the other. Our opportunities are limited with COVID quarantine. But what it means is call friends, relatives, family, even neighbors. Seriously, what can I do to make life better for someone else? You start with family and friends and then neighbors, so that if you're physically able, you could call neighbors who you know are older and say, I'm going to go shopping. Is there anything I could buy for you? It's not you're going to pay for it, but you're going to do that. But also just making the virtual contact, calling relatives and quote, Zoomness. The worst thing about the quarantine is elderly people who live alone, who have no family and are simply isolated. You know, social workers can't even get to them anymore. So your job is, what can I do to make life better for someone else, even for a short time? And just having somebody think, well, somebody knows I'm alive. Somebody knows I'm here. And so it's how do we use the virtual world to make life better? So for me, for example, in the olden days when you could connect, I focused on giving people compliments. That is, compliments are a way to say, I respect something about you.
Totally.
Now,
I agree.
Let's say I would give a talk at some university, some conference. And when somebody was coming over to me to quickly do a scan and say, oh, what a beautiful scarf that is. A, it looks so good on you. So it's not the scarf you.
Right.
And then to make sure it's not a pickup, if it's a young woman, to say, oh, where did you get it? I would like to buy one for my wife. So it's a little scenario. A, I make them feel good with a few words, but then you go from external compliment to the internal is, I really like what you said about such and such. It was very interesting. It made me think about this. So you start externally about clothing. And for a guy, you know, it could be a great looking tie. In the older days when people just have cufflinks. So you go from broad thing to say, hey, I'm noticing your tie clip. I'm noticing your cufflink. I'm noticing your scarf. I'm noticing your hat, whatever. But then the more important thing is you compliment people on what they said, meaning you're complimenting them on the way they think. People feel awkward giving compliments. Even if you're a student to a teacher, I'm saying that should be a routine at the end of every class.
Totally agreed.
say, I just finished your class. It was the best class I ever had. I learned so much. I hope you keep energizing students in our school, in our class. So again, if you think about it, you can do it anonymously, but anonymously is better than not at all.
So Dr. Z, you're going to love this. You and I are clearly brothers in this area. I really believe in giving a kind word to a living person rather than delivering it in a eulogy. I had a great Spanish teacher named Senor Davis, best teacher I ever had. And I wrote him gratitude letters, and he knew that I thought well of him. At my 20th high school reunion, I asked a bunch of people, who was your favorite teacher? Almost universally, it was Senor Davis. And I asked, did you ever tell him? And none of them said yes. And I encouraged them to do so. And of course, he died last year. So you saw all these beautiful Facebook posts. I hope that he knew it while he was alive.
The bottom line now, especially coming out of the COVID quarantine, is we have to communicate more. We have to communicate more and more. We have to tell people what we're thinking. Sometimes just curious what we're doing. Again, it's a student who might compliment me. I would like them to say, and what are you doing now? I can say, hey, I'm doing great podcasts with Adam Dorsey. So essentially it's saying, I don't want to be embedded in your memory from 30 years ago. As long as I'm still alive, I'd like you to think about, what am I doing now?
Yeah. And I'll get to that in just a second, but you're saying so many great things that I just want to emphasize to the listener. You're kind of highlighting Martin Buber and the I and thou, really recognizing the sanctity between people. And I'm also thinking about the mortality studies and how people lament on their deathbed the love they didn't give. And of course, in the eulogy, what you hear is the lament of, oh, I wish I told her while she was alive. So it's a virtuous circle of love giving, and you're attributing that to heroism, which I think is so on point. And I'm a big fan. I just need to let you know of your Heroic Imagination project. It's so on point. I mean, you integrate your study, Milgram's, the ASH study, as well as the Kitty Genovese, piece. It's so important for children to know. I remember hearing Elie Wiesel speaking in the 80s, and he said, evil is not doing something when you can, just like what you were saying. Yeah. So what are you doing now? Tell us about your life.
So in the past, I would travel 3 months a year. I would always go to Sicily at the end of May and June, literally to give scholarships to high school students who were chosen by the teachers as the outstanding. Typically, it was 10 boys and 10 girls. We'd have a big ceremony, literally give them a check, 1,000 euros, and then we'd have lunch with their parents. So that would be a routine I've been doing for 16 years. So Sicilian kids, when I started, none of them ever thought to go to college. It's not something you did. You graduated high school, you went to work. Well, then there was not very good jobs if you were not educated. So essentially, I got them to think about high school is a path to college. It's not the end. And then going to college is a path to getting an interesting job, make your life more interesting. You're going to meet in college more interesting people. Typically, you're going to find your spouse for life. And then we follow up. And of these 300 kids or more that we sent to college, almost all of them are in a good career of various kinds. So, and then in Palermo, we started a hero project run by 2 young women. And one of the amazing things was about 10 years ago, when there was a lot of migration from Africa to Southern Europe, the Sicilian government allowed a small number of young teenage men and women to come to Palermo, give them housing, give them clothing, teach them Italian, send them to school. And then the people who were working for me in the Hero Project took them and trained them how to be hero trainers, taught them our lessons. So then they would go into local high schools, which were white Catholic, and these are Black Muslims, and they would be the trainers in place of the teachers. And then we would give them a small fee, let's say 50 euros, half of which they sent home to Africa. So this is now taking our hero program to migrant youth, Black youth, and then gives them status. I mean, they are now not migrant youth, they are teachers. And what they're teaching is our heroic lessons, which nobody knew, they're all new. And then they're getting paid for it. So it's not like, a voluntary job. And then their families are grateful, not that you abandon them, but now you're sending money home. For me, this is a great example of the positive cycle, the hero cycle.
I love that so much. And I mean, and I took great delight in your book, The Lucifer Effect, and as well as Man Interrupted. And I'd like to go there for a minute because you and I both have a great interest in masculinity and helping boys become great men. I work primarily with highly functional men and helping them become even more functional. And you are noticing a trend of men just flailing in their development in pretty much every aspect of their lives. Can you describe that phenomenon?
Yeah, I wrote a book called Man Disconnected or Man Interrupted, different titles in different countries.
I have Man Interrupted.
Yeah, very simply put, is the majority of young men now in every country in the world grow up without a father. 50% or more of marriages end in divorce. Mothers always get custody of the kids. So if you're a young boy growing up without a father, without a masculine image, without somebody who gives compliments that are deserved, that is, or earned, that you're a handicap. Mothers give unconditional compliments. Mothers love you because you are their child. Fathers will give compliments to say, it's not enough to come home with bad grades. You're embarrassing the family. Try harder. If you do, good things will happen. If you don't, then there could be negative consequences. So boys have lost, in many places, that external caring, direction giving. And we find out that boys who have no father are doing poorly in school, often don't graduate high school. And now they get seduced into playing video games.
Right.
Video games are exciting. Video games are involving. The more you play, the better you get, the higher score you get. They are totally addictive. And so what we show is many of these young boys and even young men get addicted to playing video games. And many of these are, the most addictive ones are World at Warcraft.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so essentially these are combative games. And then as a break after playing video games for, when I say addictive, like 10 hours every day, every night, they switch now to online free pornography. So their life is violent video games. In many cases, violent pornography is preferred. And so the pornography, they often, again, young men feel guilty. They're masturbating. They're alone in their room. At some level, they know it's not right. And again, that combination means that for the majority of their day and night, they are online, which means they are not connecting with family, not connecting with friends, not doing schoolwork, not doing anything creative. When you're playing these games, essentially, you are a victim of the game. So you're not creating anything new.
Right.
What we show is your self-esteem goes down and you're not contributing to society at all.
Right.
So it's a terrible kind of thing. In the book, we have lots of recommendations. Now, again, what we're saying, the problem now is all their role models are female. In school, almost all teachers are female, like 90% of all teachers. The only time you get a male teacher is like in shop, if you have a metal shop or wood shop. And so we need relatives, uncles, cousins to stand by these kids, give them shepherding, arrange to take them out every Saturday to a sporting event or a hike or walk in the park or something. And we need associations to be formed, like Big Brothers clubs that, again, focus on getting these kids. We need Boy Scouts organizations to be more proactive in reaching out to the kids, not waiting for kids to come to them. So again, we need a whole media campaign that we haven't done. Things I suggested.
And you're so on point. If boys fail to become great men and self-efficacious in the ways that we need them to be for society to run, we run a risk of things going pretty badly sideways, because we know that with masculine energy being focused in a negative manner, things don't bode well.
The bigger that percentage is, it moves the society in a negative way, that there's fewer and fewer young men who are well-educated, who have values of empathy, values of caring, values of heroism, because that is totally egocentric. So we made egocentrism versus sociocentrism. Playing video games. So video games are all about conquest of the enemy. And again, many of the pornography is the enemies of women who you will
Right.
You will conquest, who will be your victims. So we have to change that mentality. That's what I've been trying to do with that program. I want to end with August 14th, 2021 is the 50th anniversary of the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Wow.
And two companies are making a documentary film about the study and, trying to relate it to current issues of police brutality. And I've been interviewed by one of these companies. And some of them are tracking down some of the former prisoners and guards who sadly are now old men. I don't even recognize them because they're now 70 years old.
Right.
And I'm a young 80. I will be 88 in March 23rd. So
and looking
I'm a
great.
young 88 and they are old 70s. So for my birthday present, your listeners can make a donation to the Heroic Imagination Project. It's tax deductible and it goes to promoting our new lessons, sharing our lessons. We'd like to develop some online lessons that we give away, but we need money to hire technicians to do that.
Dr. Z, I'm so grateful for you taking time to share your wisdom with my listeners. I'm grateful to you for the books that you've written, for the TED Talks you've delivered, for the Google Talk you've given, everything you've put out there. It's all findable on the web, at Audible, at Amazon. I highly recommend that you geek out to Dr. Z's work. It's life-changing, and the Heroic Imagination Project, I can hardly think of anything more important. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much, Adam.
Right on. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.